With that doom and gloom out of the way, we have more doom and gloom to get to here.
That's right. I think it's a good segue, right?
Mm-hmm. So 2023 has definitely had some very interesting game launches. So on the positive side, in the last few minutes or last few days, we had Diablo 4 and Street Fighter 6, which are both kind of blowing up as we speak. But in the downside, we've had the releases of Lord of the Rings Golem, Redfall, let's see, Forspoken earlier this year,
Yeah.
and definitely these games did not get the reception everyone was expecting.
No, not at all. Did you even touch Forspoken?
No, I did not. I
No.
did play Redfall though.
Okay, yeah, good. Yeah, I did not touch that one though.
Yeah, so definitely a like for our topic, we're gonna be talking about like kind of like how we can study bad game launches and what do they mean for these studios going forward. So, let's see, where should we start? I guess what's on your notes for this one?
I kind of want to start with the Gollum game first, and so we can go into depth with that one because that one's very fascinating to me and a little mind-boggling. So maybe we can help flesh that out.
All right. So you've had the chance to play that one. So what did you think of it?
Yeah, so I did play it a little bit, and shortly after playing it, I was like, I had to go into Discord and ask other people. I said, "Are you experiencing the same experience that I'm experiencing?" Because I wasn't sure if I was having some kind of computer malfunctions or if like my graphics card was burning up. I wasn't sure. Like for the prestige of this game, right? I was quite baffled about the the major issues that this had, like with animation, just movement, character movement. And as an Unreal Engine developer, I was like really dissecting it, right? Because this game was made in Unreal Engine 4. And I was really surprised with like the lighting, how poor the lighting was, how poor the controls were. And again, I really wanted to look into like, well, how much was the funding for this game actually? Because it's just such a giant fumble. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
If that IP was handed to me, there was no way I would let the game leave like that in that state. And like when you're handed a gold mine of that much lore, right? Like you don't actually have to sit down and like create this massive lore. You have it there for you for the taking, right? Like you can simply take and extract from that. And to me, as I investigate, I looked into the studio. I believe it was I don't want to mispronounce it. Daedalic Studio.
Yeah, something like that.
Okay, so I was looking and they seem to do mainly point and click adventures, right? And
Mm-hmm.
so we're going to talk about lessons learned from this. It seems that this was their first foray into a 3D the 3D world, right? A fully 3D developed game. Before that, their previous game was put up here. It was called A Year of Rain, and
Mm-hmm.
it was like it looked like kind of like the old World of Warcraft point and click games, and so that is probably an issue there. If you're going to be switching, from point and click to 3D, right? So I
Mm-hmm.
think that they overpitched, right? And then they it seems to me that this is really their first time using the engine, and it's very apparent with all the massive loading hitches, and I'm not sure if they even had a lighting guy on there, and it seemed like they use a lot of the default things and things that you can find in the asset stores. So even with what they had, they just really fumbled the ball. Yeah, so that's basically my take on it, and it's kind of sad. It's kind of sad seeing it end up like that, and I really want to know more about the story behind it. Do you know anything about what happened with the development? And of course, there's the apology, right? That we do need
Mm-hmm.
to talk about.
Mm-hmm. I don't know too much about this one. I know Seth was talking about it as well. But from
Yeah.
what you're saying, I was looking up screenshots. I watched like a 10-minute like attack video on it last night,
Right.
and it.
Playing it is an attack video. So I honestly I was baffled like by like how bad the quality of the game was. And again, I mean, I guess this used to happen all the time a long time ago, right? They would take Batman and make the
Mhm.
worst game possible, right? And Superman. It was just kind of expected that if it had an IP back in the day, that it would be a bad game. So maybe this is just, what goes around comes around kind of thing.
Mm. And I think what you were saying about it being like their first like foray into 3D is definitely an issue here. And the question I think that a lot of people are wondering is how did they get access to the Lord of the Rings IP?
Yeah.
And that is a very salient point, I think, for some of our discussions. Because again, like we remember 20, 30 years ago, like IPs for like any product are like kind of like thrown around willy nilly. If you remember, what was the name of that studio? LJN, who did a lot of IP publishing like that. And like we really haven't seen like a game like this, in like 30 years. Like Vincent's bringing up Warhammer. Like the Warhammer games have definitely been hit or miss, but it feels like the studios have at least like some experience in their
Yeah.
respective genres, whether it's a real-time strategy, turn-based, third-person action. Like there at least seems to be like some level of vetting going on, at least at that level. So again, it's a very weird like misfire, and I think it's a misfire that again, like we're talking about in 2023, where there are plenty of people who can cover these games. Like just imagine if LGN was still making games in 2023, and people like making videos about Jaws or uh, Friday the 13th, the game, and so on.
Gosh, the Friday the 13th game I still have nightmares about that NES game to this day. Um and if anybody else does, let me know.
Hmm. And like we were saying, it's one of those very weird situations because as game design has evolved and grown, so has everyone becoming far more scrutinizing over these kinds of things. And to see a game like I was like looking like the menuing for this game, and this was something that Seth brought, like features very basic fonts, like nothing seemed to have been done there. And again, like for like a prestige game like this, like even if the studio itself may not have been known, the Lord of the Rings IP is very well known. It would be like again, like if Nintendo decided to license, like do like the old like Philips CDI, like those like really weird games, and doing it with the Mario IP today.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, that I think is the biggest mystery to me. I feel like someone at the studio, because they've published quite a few games, so I feel like maybe they mastered the art of the pitch deck, and that's how they were able
Mm-hmm.
to acquire the IP. But as far as like, and maybe they promised something else and delivered something else, right? I mean, that to me seems like the only thing. But again, this happening now is very strange, and I just don't know how a game of that quality could come out with that type of IP nowadays. Like you're not going to see Spider-Man coming. I don't know. Name another game. Name another IP game. Right. I mean, even the last right, and this is a follow up to that. Just the last Lord of the Rings game that was actually received well, right? And now you have this, right? It was released afterwards, right? And so like you even have that, and what's strange is that they have access to so many like assets, right? They could go back, right? They could contact previous studios, previous CGI artists. Hey, can you like hook me up with this model or something? Because I don't know if you've like looked at the graphics, but it's almost like it to me. It looks like it Demon Souls with like a filter on it, like a degradation filter. And I think Demon Souls was released in 2006 or 2009. Anyway, it just looks really bad, and it's I was quite baffled by that. But anyway, yeah.
Hmm. And when we're talking about like a game being released today like this, it's such a, again, like, even though we're going to be talking about at least two other big examples in today's video or today's stream, it is a very rare occurrence to see a game kind of fall this harshly. Um, we're talking about like major IPs. Of course, Marvel's Avengers came out with a lot of issues, and that game is probably more going to be closely related to what people are saying happened with Redfall in terms of kind of having like that games as a service feature tied to it. But we really haven't seen like, I mean, like we've seen like bad games. We've seen games that don't do as well, but to see a game like just like come right out and fall that hard, it is unfortunately like a strange thing to see in 2023.
It definitely is. It definitely is. And as I was doing research back in on Daedalic, on one of the previous games, which was State of Mind, and it was a small cyberpunk game. And as I'm looking at it, as I thumb through the screenshots of it, again, I notice just a lot of reuse of like Unity assets or from a studio that I know, Polygon, that creates a lot of assets. So they're just really reusing assets here. But anyway, in the article, they state that they admit that with their modest indie budget, it was never going to allow for the kind of breathtaking sci-fi cityscapes of Dukes, Mankind Divided, or detailed facial animations of Anthem. So they were admitting that even then they had a modest budget, and this was like just recently. So I'm going to assume that they just didn't have the budget here at all. As I was playing it, as I was playing it, I got a very, very indie vibe, right? And also like almost a solo game developer vibe from it. Is what I got really bad. So I feel like maybe just like a lot of people weren't working on it anymore or something. I don't know, but yeah, that's the vibe I got. I was like, wow, one person, but I know games by one person done much, much better. So, like Vince right here, he released a walking simulator, and that game is much better than this one. So that was solo.
And when you're looking at like kind of games like this, as you said, like being a solo developer, we've seen like fantastic titles.
Yeah.
And it does feel like something went wrong during Golem's development, or at least something didn't work as right as it should be. It could have been, like, as you said, like, it could have been off more than they could chew with a game like this. And again, like, one of the points I think that will come up quite frequently in our discussion today is it better just to cancel a game or release a game like when it has like this much baggage and negative feedback around it?
Yeah, I mean that's an excellent question. I believe like in this case, like it probably would be better off canceled, right? Than actually like solely now the studio has so much negative press. If you haven't heard of them before, now you've heard of them and you only know of them for this one singular reason, right? And again, it's a case of like biting off more than you can chew. And this is just from my summation, is that of course they went from a completely different engine. They switched from, I don't know, some simpler 2D engine to Unreal, which is quite an undertaking in itself, right? And then also acquiring that IP and then trying to make it all work. So it just kind of, I'm trying to remember what was the studio that made the Walking Dead and the
Telltale.
Telltale. It reminds me of like when Telltale started like biting off more they can chew, acquiring massive amounts of IPs and trying to really choose one. And this one would be like their kind of similar thing, right? Is that, switching in. So the takeaway here would be like, be careful when you're switching engines, that, like how much that you're putting at stake when you're doing that, right? Because clearly they did do that, and there's a lot involved in it. Like you'll hear some game devs say like the engine doesn't matter, bro, and this and that, and it really does. Like it matters a huge amount. If you were going from Unity to Unreal, the learning curve itself, right, could take you years, right? So if you're doing that at the same time when you're trying to create a game, I feel like this is what you will end up with, right? So
Yep, and as you said, like with the like switching engines, mixing things up like this, it's a very like again like game dev is a very nebulous topic about the actual production of a game. You can
yes.
have three different studios with three very different budgets put out vastly different qualities of game. Some of it again is the quality of the people on the team. Some of it could be, the person running things, keeping things organized. And a lot can happen in a game's development. And I think, like, going back to my point I said a minute ago about whether it would have been better to cancel this game or let it keep going. Like, one of the major things we've spoken about, I know, especially on the roundtable, is how much game coverage has changed in the past 10 years. Like, today, a bad game can't slip through the radar anymore. And again, when we say a bad game in this respect, we're talking about a game that it does not work. Like, it fundamentally is not the game that was promised. This is, again, like, what, like, the 1s and 2s out of 10s are there for. 20, 30 years ago, if a bad game came out, okay, you find out about maybe a month or two in a magazine. Maybe, like, if you're watching, like, G4 or some other thing like that, you'll get, like, a little bit of information about it. But all in all, these games would still at least sell, at least, until, word of mouth came out negatively about. And again, we didn't have refund policies until, what was it, like 2013? I think it was like, 2015, 2016, maybe a little bit later than that. So,
yeah. You bought it, you were stuck with it. I mean, you were going by like the cover of the last magazine you saw of it, right? And then that was it. And so yeah, like it would literally sell more. It would sell based on the IP, just like you said. People would pick it up, and then it would take like maybe 3 months at least in the news cycle before it got to the playground, right?
And in that time, that game can still at least earn back its funding. And there wasn't as much in terms of investigation with a lot of these games. Again, game comes out, it's bad, okay, who cares after 3 to 6 months? Today, we still have people making videos about Redfall or Forspoken and some of the other games that came out that didn't do so well. And as we've said, it makes it very hard these days to kind of like put all your eggs in one basket. You do have to, I think, be very more considerate as to the product you're putting out now. Because if your game turns out horrible, and again, like, there are some games that, get negative reviews or issues, and, that's, tit for tat. That could be just, player feedback or, different opinions. But when a game comes out and you can just see, like, the low quality, you can see the problems with it that apparently, that's the stuff that it becomes like a brand against that studio going forward. And again, it's something that when we get to Redfall in a few minutes, that will come back certainly in spades.
Definitely.
Let's see. And yeah, like, I'm looking at, like, some of the reviews for Golem. And, like, when Daedalic got the rights to, and that, I think, raised another question. Like, did they get the rights to the property before they had a game? Or did they have a game first and say, let's try and, work the Lord of the Rings IP into this? This is something that I spoke with John Breer about, who does a lot of, like, licensed games. He's done a lot of, like, playtesting and stuff like that. And it's usually one or the other. Either the developer has a game and says, you know what? I'm going to pitch it and, we want to use so-and-so's IP, and if they like it, then we convert the game to it. Or in some cases, it could be the studio saying, we want to have a game based on our IP. Let's shop around and see who is able to do what with it. And we don't know exactly how did the IP end up with Daedalic, and what was like the deal or process that went with that.
I don't know. I definitely feel like they pitched it first. Because it seemed so disconnected to the way everything was made, and they really didn't have an idea of what they were making. I feel like if they had a prototype, it would at least have played better or felt better. Um, Unless
Mm-hmm.
whoever they sold it to, I mean, they just had to have the best pitch deck of all time. And like you were talking about canceling it earlier. As far as I know before this, like I never thought anything really negative of the studio. I don't want to pronounce it wrong, of the studio previously, and now I do, right? And so that's the thing. Should you cancel it? And I believe you should. If you were that, there's no shame in just putting it down and understanding. Okay, this is not working. Clearly we don't want to sully our studio's image because we want to make future games after that, and we would like to get another IP because we're reaching really high. We want to get we're looking for Lord of the Rings Gollum is what we're aiming for. So if you're aiming that high, you need to make sure you have everything ready. And like I definitely think like even if they stuck with what brought them to the dance was like a point and click adventure, I'm sure they could have figured something out and came up with instead of whatever they invested in learning Unreal, they could have invested that into paying artists so they could have great art in their 2D point and click adventure. And literally I remember us just talking about where all the point and click adventure games, and this would be a great resurgence of like they missed their chance to like literally create a resurgence with a good IP. I mean, just saying, I was looking at all their other games have been mostly point and click, so that's what they know. And so lesson here is like be very wary of switching engines, and uh be very wary of like, because it is possible for someone out there to like create a pitch deck like anybody, like, and get that IP. If you are so lucky, like treat it with reverence. And if you do not feel like you can deliver the product, I feel it is best that you cancel it and
Mm-hmm.
and save your studio's image. And so you're not known because like, do you think good of Telltale? I
Mm-hmm.
mean, right? Is Telltale the studio name? Yeah.
Of the Walking Dead and stuff like that. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, do you think like no? You think of them, and what do you think of when you think of Bethesda? You think of bugs and things like that. So like those tarnishes end up on a studio and they stay there, right? And then, as you mentioned earlier, this is not a climate that you can release any poor quality anything. Like I was literally watching, like you watched a couple hit pieces on Gollum.
Mm-hmm.
I watched some on Redfall because I didn't have the pleasure of playing it, and the things that they were articulating were things that I would never imagine, right? That they're paying attention to. They're literally like there was like 5 minutes dedicated to the responsiveness of like the pickup feature, right? It's
Mm-hmm.
like they know that your pickup feature is not working properly. I mean, every little single thing about your game is being dissected, and that's something to keep in mind. So like there's no way you can release a shoddy product, and you can't overpromise. And I think some of the next games we're going to talk about have overpromised as well.
Mm-hmm. And let's see. Um, yep, to Alexander's point that if the gameplay turned out all right, a lot of the issues would, again, like I think people these days are far more willing to accept gameplay over graphics, and it's something that there's a greater discussion to be had there about kind of like the AAA landscape in that
Yeah.
respect, with a lot of studios again trying to push AAA fidelity, but it doesn't really work that way. And I guess to wrap up my thoughts with Golem, and then we'll move on. I guess we'll do Redfall next. Um, like I know there's some people who don't like Dalek. They said like this is not the first time they've released games that don't have like this level of quality. And this is something that again, like there's always that term about bad press. There's no such thing as bad press. But I feel like with the game industry or with any kind of commercial product, that's not true anymore. That if your car explodes or your soft drink contains iron in it, like bad press is not going to go away on that. Like that is oftentimes the end of a studio or end of a company.
Insta tweeted, man. Yeah, I mean we are in a 24-hour news cycle, and I've literally just spoke to someone. I was poking around asking if anybody played Redfall, and to my surprise, nobody played it because of the bad press. So nobody even wanted to play it, right? And the same thing with Gollum. I had to play it because I couldn't quite believe what I've heard about it. I was like, let me verify this, and I did verify it. And yeah, it's not. I don't recommend it at all. Yeah.
And one of the other major points is going to be the price of these games. Redfall is 70, Golem is 50. Let's see, Forspoken is still at. Is it still on Steam? Oh, there it is. It's 70. And that is a huge pill to swallow to spend 70, 50, hell, even spend $20 on games like this. And as a very interesting counterpoint.
Which one was 70?
Forspoken and Redfall.
Wow.
And as a interesting counterpoint there, the Starship Troopers game that I looked at like about a week or so ago, it is priced at where was it? Where are you? $25.
Yeah, and I've been hearing great things about it.
And it is by no means like a AAA super polished game right now. But as I said in my preview of it, all they had to do was stick the landing. They just had to prove to people that this can work, and then they can expand on it for how many months or years of early access. With the examples that we talk about today, these are games that just kind of drop. Like there's no early access, there's no period where you can try these games out. Like one day they're not on the store, the next day they're there. And again, it's like one of those situations where it's almost like a slow-moving car crash when you see and hear about some of the issues. And again, as we'll go transition into Redfall next, that was certainly a case there.
Yeah, definitely. And just like Baker said, gameplay is king. Like I would have found the way it looked, because I was astonished by how bad it looked. Gollum, the lighting was garish, and it looks garish. Like it's really hard to look at, and it also plays really poorly. And it would be almost charming, right? Because you're Gollum, right? And I could imagine it being gritty and garish. Like it could kind of work. Even had a decent soundtrack. I swear it could be from like Demon Souls. That's why it was giving me Demon Souls vibes. But if it played well, then we wouldn't even be talking about it, right? It'd be I guess they were trying to make a platformer. I'm not sure what they were trying to make. And I literally know there's asset packs on the Unreal store that handle better than that they could have purchased. And it's just such a big flop. There's code bases that exist for the issues that they were facing that they just weren't ready for. But yeah, man, I mean, that you were talking about, that is a longer discussion. It's, to me, about the AAA landscape, it really doesn't seem, to me at least, that graphics matter as much as they think it means, right? I know that there's another Puddlegate happening, I heard. But I think that's so niche now. I think that the wider audience of gamers is just, they want to play games, right? That are fun and functional and work. And sadly, Gollum didn't work at all. And I think that's some of the issues we're going to find with the next game as well, right, Josh?
Mm-hmm. So, let's go to Redfall. Is there anything else you want to mention about Golem before we switch?
Okay, yeah, that's right. Before we head on, because what did you feel about the apology?
Oh yeah, that I think is a very weird thing. I know I brought up a tweet from an older developer that says like you really shouldn't be apologizing, like getting on your hands and knees and begging for forgiveness
Yeah,
when it comes to a game, because at the end of the day, a video game is a product, and there's I think a greater discussion. I think this is something I would love to have, like bring in like Tomo and Seth on as
yeah,
well, about kind of like what does it mean to have a video game or to have a game out these days? Because as we've said again, like as a tagline here, like video games are both art and science. They're both entertainment and a product, or I'm sorry, art and a product. And a lot of people, I think, only view video games as being, like the most like highest like artistic value. That a game can't fail, and if it does fail, then it's some kind of like Watergate level scandal that should rock the industry. But at the end of the day, a video game is still just a game. Whether, it comes from a 60-person prestige studio who spent 7 years on it, or if it's from just two guys in a garage making, their first platformer. And, like, for me, like, if a game is bad, I'm just like, okay, it's bad, don't play it,
yeah,
refund it, move on. Like I don't harbor like a blood feud against a studio if a game is bad. And part of this I think has to do with like like everyone likes to throw that term like that power social relationship that people have, and
yeah,
like it's something that the game industry has I think unfortunately dabbled in. Even independent developers have done this, where it's no longer about being involved with the game. You have to follow the company on Twitter. You get to participate in all their weird tweets and contests. So when a studio does great, it's all good and everyone loves each other. When that studio does something bad or they do something that is considered, out of step, then, the hammer comes down, as we saw with the Five Nights at Freddy's developer. And kind of like him having to leave the franchise after people caught him donating to like very like anti-LGBTQ people while promoting being very inclusive towards LGBTQ.
yeah, definitely. And I mean, speaking of weird tweets, if you want to check out Diadalic's Instagram, it's very strange. I was because I was doing some research on. I was trying to figure them out, and they're a bit strange. I wouldn't run PR like that, but I think that to me the apology is, and like you said, like indie developers are dabbling in it and everything. Like I don't think like you said, video games are not. This is not like life or death, right? We're creating art. We're creating. Yes, we're creating a product, but like this type of apology to me is like creates the
Mm-hmm.
sort of entitlement that I don't think needs to exist, right? I don't think we should be like they really shouldn't be apologizing. Like I was looking far back. I don't know if we'll have time to bring it up, but Final Fantasy 14 had like a really terrible launch, and the CEO did not apologize for its terrible launch. He said, "Yes, it's in this state, and we're
Mm-hmm.
working on it." But the apology, the way they worded it, I just felt like I think the kids would call it cringe. It felt like that to me, and I don't think that we should be putting ourselves in that, and like especially like for indie devs, like I think this creates a bad precedent, right? And I know so many indie devs who like would feel entitled, and that they would have to like apologize, and I'm so sorry I made a terrible game. And like you said, bad games get made all the time. This is what happens. We need to just move on. And as a mental health aspect, how it's like trickling down,
Mm-hmm.
that this mindset is was we're in service to gamers, right? And it's not, it shouldn't be that type of relationship, right? We game developers are human beings too.
Mm-hmm.
We live normal lives just like everyone else, and so like I don't think like putting ourselves up into that type of mental situation is good for sustainability, like mentally as game developers. And then also, like for this Gollum case, literally just put a stain on their studio. So yeah, I mean, and Redfall as well.
Hmm. And it is definitely like that very weird situation where, as you said, like it puts developers in an awkward spot as to, like what should someone expect out of a game?
Yeah.
And like as an interesting point, there's a game that I follow, Rise to Ruins, which is like an indie game that sole developers been working on for years now. And because he didn't update the game in I think like 6 months to a year, all these people started massively downvoting and negative reviewing his game. And he said like he had like a issue with his house that they had to get fixed, so he couldn't
Yeah.
work on the game. But again,
Yeah.
it's that situation of, as a consumer, where exactly do you have that line of what you're allowed to ask or expect of a game? And I have a video, Critical Thought, I need to edit this weekend. Hopefully, after I do that Windows repair, nothing blows up. That,
Yeah.
again, tries to answer that question as to that what is a video game in today's market? Is it
Yeah.
a product? Is it, this art that can never be touched? Or is it somewhere in between?
Right. And unfortunately, I think it's going to be in that gray area somewhere in between. But I definitely don't think it leans to the extreme as game developers are in serve. I mean, see, the thing is that literally there's games as service, right? And so like
Mm-hmm.
when you're in that area, it's a bit dicey. Here, Redfall was a game to service, right? Or is it still alive?
Kind of, maybe. It's kind of hard to tell. But if we are moving to Redfall, I guess I can give my little run of it. So Redfall, I played it on Games Pass, thankfully, so I didn't have to spend 1 cent on it. But if the other game kind of came out and kind of like surprised everyone, like this, I think was even bigger. Like this comes from a studio that we all know, Arcane, and there's a lot to unpack with like kind of what happened with Redfall. So there's
Yeah.
been Jason Schreier, he did like a piece on it, and people are dissecting it, every inch of it, on YouTube videos and stuff like that. And you can probably find a few dozen of them by now going over the
Yeah.
same pieces. And some of the points I read about that kind of stick out. The first is that, as I said when I did my review, I said something about this game's development did not work. Like I could tell just by playing the game that something is not right here. And one of the things that was kind of revealed was that it's not exactly sure as to who started what, but this game did start out as a live service, monetization heavy, we're going to do season passes and all that stuff, always online play. And at some point in the game's development, they decided to turn that off or, move away from it. But in like that very similar analog to when MMOs decided to go from subscription to free to play, you can't just flip a switch. You can't just, turn off monetization and everything else in your game is going to work. It requires pretty much building a brand new game.
Mhm.
And there's a lot of, like, just at that layer, we're not even talking about the gameplay yet. Like, the game requires you to always be online, even if you're playing it single player. You don't have drop in, drop out multiplayer. Even something as simple as allowing players to carry their character progress or their campaign progress or the multiplayer, it doesn't work like that. And these are just like on their own enough to just like ruin a game like this. And then as another point from the report, that it also really highlights again how much studio name is different from kind of the people who work there. And
Yeah.
this is something that we've said many times over. Whether it's, a company like Maxis, when a lot of their major heads left.
Mhm.
What was another one? Telltale had, I think, guttings as well during, like, right around the time they were going under. And of course with Arcane, they said, I think, like, 70% of the people who worked on Prey are no longer at the company. So, yes, while the studio name Arcane is still there, much like the studio name of Blizzard, the actual culture of that studio, the people who made those games, are no longer there. Like, I think the only companies that have kind of kept their culture very stable would definitely be Nintendo, and I think Valve. Although I've heard horror stories about working at Valve as well.
Yeah, I've heard some horror stories about working at Valve for sure. I think that the lesson here, and this is very important, and like capitalism listen very well, like gutting 70% of a studio will not yield you good games and or profit, right? Um, it's like how I was talking about earlier in the previous game that we were talking about. I was talking about switching over to the engine is a massive feat, right? Like we all remember, like, was it the Frostbite engine, the Nightmares of Frostbite engines, and things like that? Like every engine that's mentioned, there's a reason that that name comes up. Like engines do matter. I'm gonna have to make a video that engines do matter.
Mm-hmm.
Like it's really it's very important for the development, the pipeline, what software you can use, right? And so I mean, when you lose that much of your, I mean, we don't know who was lost in that 70%. It could be like literally like the optimization guy, literally like the source control guy, like our woman, man, anything like it. Very important people, and like what is, again, you mentioned nebulous, is that a lot of facets of game development are very, very nebulous, but they are very, like, they're really required, especially when you're working on this level, right? You need some very nebulous people on your team, like nebulous, like type jobs, because games are very, they're just different in that way. And so, just again, like the main thing before we dive deeper into this is like how important it is for you to retain your team, to keep your culture. Like it is it's one of the most important things for a studio. And like when also like what happens when a studio gets gutted is like the remaining people that are there, literally they got like a negative 50 morale drop, right? They know that they could be on the chopping block left. So what kind of work do you expect out of them, right? So the studio at Arcane that lost 70%, how are the other people feeling while they were working, right? So these are things to keep in mind. And even at a very small level, it doesn't matter what level you're working at, it is very important that the people you work with like are taken care of. You just cannot throw such talent away, right? Like it's really important to treat your employees right. So that's one lesson here, is that keeping your team is super important in this field, especially, right? Like you cannot take just people from that are working on God of War, that are working on a completely different engine, and say, hey, come work on Unreal with me, buddy. We're going to make the best MMO ever. Like you really can't do that. If that person has never worked on Unreal or whatever, like there's going to be a massive learning curve. And so like all of these things need to be understood about game development. And that's just anyway. So what else do you know about it, Josh?
Yep. And like before I get to that point, like to what you were just saying, like when the culture of a studio changes, it really does reverberate out into these games. And Naughty Dog is another example of this. I know that studio was going through a whole lot of restructuring.
And we just talked about was in Disco Asylum, right?
Yeah, Disco Elysium.
The Elysium, sorry, yeah.
Yeah, and how much like that is, like there's a whole lot to unpack with that one that we do not have the time to get to for today. And again, it's one of those cases, I think, for a lot of consumers that you don't notice until the studio starts screwing up. And as we
Yeah.
said, with a lot of the stuff that's happened with Blizzard over the past like 4 years, that a lot of the people who were known, or the people behind the scenes making sure that these studios work, are no longer there. And as we've said, like, game journalists and reviewers, they love like the stories of a studio coming together and getting a game out. But there's a lot that can happen along the way. And it's why there's such high churn at some of these major studios. When you spend 3, 4 years of your life, breaking your fingers to get a game out there, and your only contribution is just, a tiny little name mentioned in the credits after like a 50-hour, play that everyone skips.
If you're lucky, yeah.
Yeah. Oh yeah, and if you leave or something happens, your name doesn't get, and they remove your name from the credits. That's another big issue.
And then you can't tell anyone because you signed a NDA, so you can't show anyone your work. So then there's poor devs who like had to leave, didn't get their name on their credits for what they did, and had to sign an NDA and can't show anybody their work. Right? Like that is quite like menacing. Anyway, go ahead, Josh.
Yeah. And these things, again, will drive people out of studios. But the studio itself, again, like we've said this before about how important certain people are. And there is definitely that discussion we had that one person doesn't make or break a company. But if you lose 20, 30, 50% of the people for whatever reason, that kind of affects things. And as you said, with how nebulous game development can be, if a really good department head or a department lead leaves your company, that can reverberate out to other aspects. Now something doesn't get done at the right time, which then pushes something else back, which then pushes something else back. And suddenly these games start getting longer and longer in development. Things aren't working as they should. And again, heaven forbid you lose like your director on a game.
Yeah.
Especially the one who originally pitched the game's idea. If they leave or they get fired during the middle of development, as we said, like, who's navigating the ship? Who's steering the ship at that point?
Right, exactly. I mean, yeah, you did say, like, just especially like in the smaller, not even large situations. I mean, like you were just talking about Naughty Dog, right? Like the heads leave and everything's completely different, right? It's like who's steering the ship, like you just said. And it's really important to understand, like I don't know, most of y'all watching here are into game dev and understand game dev, but like actually like take a step and maybe compare the credits to, like, I don't know, the next movie that you watch. And I guarantee you that you will see more people working on the video game than you see in the movie, because there's practically a movie in your video game anyway, right? Like lots of video games are movies, right? And it's a lot of them take the aspects of making a movie, encapsulating it into just a playable movie. Oh, the resurgence of FMVs, by the way, that's another good topic. But I mean, like really understanding. So like this is especially like for like people who invest and things like that. I mean, like this is not, game development is not the type that you can just like crunch numbers at and grind at and expect good results. When we say that, we're studying the art and wisdom, right, of this game. This is a literal science. There's little psychology to it. There's so many facets to it. And to so blatantly just expect like the Ford factoryism to work on video games is really silly. And we're seeing that right now. We're seeing the reverberations right now. Everybody's wondering why AAA games are like this right now. And like, honestly, like we can always point back to, like, sadly, the way that that you know, a lot of a lot of game devs have to court money, right, or like acquire money for the studio because it requires so much money and so much talent. Because again, there's so many people that are needed, and then right, I mean, it's just you have to treat it differently, and you can't. We're sadly seeing the effects of capitalism, especially on AAA right now. Luckily, um, indie can do that, but like again, we're also being crushed by it also, right? Like the behaviors that AAA does, like a lot of indie devs want to exactly copy, right? Like want to make the next Gollum, of course, right? Who doesn't? And so and so like that's one of the things is like is that AAA is kind of like modeling in it. But I think right now is that we actually do need to do a dive into like what the state of AAA is right now, because I am sure that most people would say that it's very regurgitative. It lacks just any time that it's given like massive, even if it's given massive amounts of money, it's pushed against wrong time pressures, or we'll say like how do you make a diamond? By crushing coal, right?
Yeah.
Those type of pressures, and doing that to the team, and paying them less, firing them less, firing them more, and then treating them worse, right? And then expecting a good product. And this is simply not the area that you can do that, right? I mean, I don't think that you could go to, I don't know, some famous movie star and be like, yeah, so we're not putting you in the credits, and all your work is forget about you. Like, you couldn't do that to Harrison Ford, right? But like, these video games are making more money than Harrison Ford, right? The market is massive, and so that's why all the capitalism is there. But again, just like we address the issues with microtransactions and other things, these are why these issues are evident. So,
and to your point about kind of like investors and publishers wanting the money and like trying to make it like this mass production factory assembly, I spoke with someone, I think they were from South Korea a few months ago, about like angel investors and like how like angel investors look at companies and pitch. And a lot of it, again, comes down to the prestige of the names involved. An angel investor does not care about gameplay programmer number 6 on your team. They care about, is this studio Blizzard? Is this, owned by Microsoft? Do they work with Microsoft? And that's where they're going to throw money at. If you're, a 10-person indie team and you're trying to get maybe $100,000 of investment, you might as well be asking for like $50 million if you're going to an angel investor, because they're going to look and you go, I don't care. But they'll happily throw like millions of dollars if, the studio who helped make The Walking Dead, or the studio that worked on Final Fantasy or whatever, or even if you're just like have names, you could just say, well, yeah. And again, that's why the credits of a name are so important. If you can say to someone, yeah, this is me, I did this in Diablo, Zelda, Assassin's Creed, give me money. And an angel investor's like, yeah, like you worked on 3 very big titles, we're more than happy to at least give you a test there. But the problem, again, is that with a video game today, you really don't have that kind of, you can't do that that kind of mass assembly work with a game. And I think to another important point, studios are not interchangeable. And like we've said, with the nebulous nature of game dev, as we've said, and as I've said many times before, just because your studio put out the best damn RPG of 2021 doesn't mean anything if you're trying to make the next big action looter shooter, or if you're trying to go from being a first-person shooter developer to making a CRPG. They are fundamentally different games, and while your experience can certainly carry you a lot in terms of the actual production side, the actual designing of this game, the art and science of what a game is, that takes time and it takes experience. And as I said a few minutes ago, if your director, who let's say spent 20 years of their life working on first person shooters and action games, and they pitched, the super powerful, power fantasy action game to an investor, and they leave, and there's not one person on your studio who has anywhere near that same experience, where are you going to get that? And again, like we've said, the actual production side is different from the design side. It's different from the system side. Again, a team that can make a fantastic RPG, they may not know what makes a fantastic first-person shooter or a fantastic platformer. And just saying that you can just, pull a lever and now the studio makes those kinds of games, it doesn't work like that.
Right. I mean, you made a lot of good points there. I mean, geez, like by this point, I mean, we're still, I still say this, we're still in the infancy of video game development, but we've been around long enough where some of these studios are basically like football teams, right? They're just names, right? All of the previous players, like Michael Jordan left a long, long time ago, right? And sorry, you're not going to see Jordan play anymore because he's not there, and thus the games won't be at the same level. Like, so again, like, yes, while the studio name is worth something, again, which you would probably want to cancel a bad game, not to sully your studio name, right? Mm-hmm. There are like football teams now, and again, also about them not being interchangeable. Like, if you gave me like the exact same code base, here's all the assets, here's the code, and you gave it to all of the game developers that I don't know, we'd all make something different, right? So that, again, that's something else. And again, that comes down to what we know and what our expertise is. And let me go back, and you mentioned the production, right? And so it's like, okay, these games, like, definitely, good deal. You can get a game out the door. You can produce it. That doesn't mean that you understand the subject matter of the game at all, right? Or even know what you're making. But yes, you will. I mean, they got the best source control guy. They got the best database guy. They got some good marketing. They can get it done and get it out. But can they do that game in that genre? Can they do it right, and do they understand it, right? So that's super important. And I mean, again, just like back again to another point you made about, when the person that pitched the game, the heart and the soul, the super hyper dude who's like, this is going to be the best game ever. It's going to be freaking amazing. Like, you've seen the guys on, like, the poor guys, they had to do like E3s and like get all pumped. Those guys that had to get up there and just say the weirdest things about the game, you're gonna love to rip and tear. If they got rid of that guy, how would the game be, right? I mean, so it's like there is a literal heart and soul, and you can't just replace it because of money factors and wanting to factorio everything. But yeah, I mean, I guess that covers up those points there.
And it's, again, why, as you said, you can give the same exact resources to 5-10 different developers and get 5 to 10 very different games. If you look at stuff like when I cover stuff like the Dread X collection, the Hollow PlayStation 1 demo disc, all these games come from established in the space indie horror designers. And they all do massively different things. And you can't just say to a major studio, well, you made a first-person shooter, go make an RPG. Or you make an RPG, go make a real-time strategy game. Well, Fortnite is popular, why can't you just make a Fortnite? There's the line for today's thing. Just go make a Fortnite for all the studios watching this. I'm sure it will turn out well. And when we are like talking more about with what happened with Redfall, again, it's that situation where they were kind of put in this position to say, the publisher said, we want a looter shooter live service game, and Arcane was definitely not that studio to do it. And it's unfortunately that kind of issue that publishers have over developers. If the publisher who has a 60% stake in your company says, you know what, I'm looking for a match 3, Candy Crush Saga game, can you do it? You're not going to say, no, we make visual novel games.
Yeah, the CEO comes to the company and he's like, "Hey, my son tells me that microtransactions and shooters are the best new thing. You got to make it now." And then you're like, "We make point and click," and so they get forced into the corner. And sometimes you like, what are you gonna do? You need the money to keep your studio afloat, and you got to do it. So maybe that's what happened in some of these situations. Right? We will find out eventually. But yeah, definitely.
And again, if your studio is not familiar with that genre, it doesn't matter the prestige of everyone on that team. It doesn't matter if you have, the writer who wrote every episode, all the best episodes of Game of Thrones or Breaking Bad. If no one knows how to make a really good looter shooter or a really good RPG, you're kind of in trouble. And one of the things that we see from these games, I think it's something that we see more in the AAA space, more in the independent space, because indies don't have that luxury to completely change their game every 3 to 4 years. You can turn a Samurai Pig into a looter shooter in like 2 years, and then, just decide to then turn it into a rhythm game. You could do that in like a year, right?
Yes. The next one is the rhythm game thing. I mean, I was going to announce it later, Josh, but thanks for announcing it ahead of time.
And
pre-order now.
Yep. And I said this on my video, and a lot of the parallels kind of came true, that what I saw with Redfall sounded eerily similar to Anthem by BioWare.
Yeah.
And some of the things that they said in the reporting on Redfall kind of brought that point home, that no one really quite knew where the game was going to go, so they had to keep changing it. The phrase arcane magic was brought up. And here's a pro tip to all developers out there. Don't describe your studio as magical. It never goes well in these circumstances. But you have a game that, and this is again, I think, one of like those weird points between AAA and indie. If an indie developer spends 7-8 years of their life on a single game, it's usually because, let's say they did it part-time, let's say it wasn't, their full focus. If a AAA studio spends 6-7 years of their life on a single game, something is not right there, even if it does come from a major name. And
especially if it comes from a major name, I think that's even more red flags right there, right? Because they have their pipeline in order already, right?
Yeah. And again, like, to that point, hey Chris, thanks for stopping your Diablo 4 fix to tune in. Like, it's to that point as to why good game production is really worth its weight in gold when it comes to these studios. As we've said, like, Nintendo operates at their own level. Like, you can't really put Nintendo into the same place as any other studio in the world right now.
And can't touch them.
And again, it's part of the reason why they've held on so long compared to.
When are we going to get we got to get an interview with them, Josh?
Again, I'm here. If Doug Bowser wants to come on, I'm ready.
Yeah.
I would love to talk with Shigeru Miyamoto for a few minutes about Mario. I mean, that's only like 2-minute conversation.
Yeah, it's pretty simple. On your 10K. We'll do it on your 10K.
Exactly. And like, one of the things that everyone kind of got, like, fell out of their seat over was, and they were talking about in an interview with Tears of the Kingdom, and I still need to play that one, when Nintendo just said, you know what, we're just going to take a year to polish this game. We're just going to do 1 year of polish. And, like, every AAA, I think, developer who read that, they had, like, a small heart attack. I think they all kind of, like, we had, like, a code black at the ER for a few minutes there when they heard, the company just say, just take a year to polish. It's just that simple.
Right.
You hit that polish button. You just,
Don't forget the polish checkbox if you're using Unreal. And if you're using Unity, you have to edit the ini file. So, but that's okay. But yeah, I mean, like we don't have that luxury. Nintendo totally can, and that's the thing. Like, did the Gollum developer have the luxury of taking a year? Did Redfall, where they pushed to release immediately, and I think they released at a bad time too. Also, I'm not sure. If you looked at the release window, but were they pushed because of investors to release at a bad time? And again, from what we've seen, they didn't really know what they were making. And I mean, like their previous game was like Deathloop, right? And then what
before
did
that
Deathloop?
was Prey or Dishonored 2.
Yeah, and they
like,
did both Dishonored. They did both Dishonored. It's like, wow.
but again, the team that worked on both Dishonored and Prey
Where are they?
certainly not the same team that worked on Deathloop and Redfall.
Right, exactly.
Yep, and a lot of these circumstances, again, you will not know about them unless the game does horribly. Because
Right.
I can guarantee you that there's probably stories like this at other major studios. Again, the only reason people don't talk about The Last of Us 2 is that The Last of Us 2 came out great. And this, again, is one of the downsides of kind of like the AAA machine. You can have a studio where everyone hates working on this game. There are multiple reports of, harassment and poor working conditions and a toxic environment. But if that game turns out gets a 9.75 on IGN or a 10 out of 10 from GameSpot, who cares, really? I mean, who cares that, 80% of the studio hated working on the game as long as it got, the Game of the Year awards.
Right, exactly. Yeah, and I mean, a lot of those, I think with like Red Dead Redemption 2, everything that happened with that got swept under the rug, right? It was this massive, it was this massive crushing machine, must finish Red Dead 2, must be amazing, and they just trampled on the bodies and the devs until it was done, and then it was done, but it was good, so no one cares about all the dead bodies, right? And the people that like have to see it has to go to therapy for the rest of their lives now. But
and I think part of the reason why those games succeeded is that the people in charge did not leave. Like,
right.
in a lot of cases, like again, when we talk about Anthem, I think they went through like 3 different directors over the course of the game's development. So you had the people who were
Redfall?
Anthem.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Sorry.
But like with Anthem, like you had the case where the people who were trying to direct the thing kept leaving.
Yeah.
When you have stuff like with the Grand Theft Auto or Naughty Dog's case, the people in charge who were arguably causing the problems, they weren't going anywhere. Like, it's their baby. So,
yeah.
Again, it's at that point where you talk about, the human machine. Oh, 10 programmers quit or they got fired? Bring 10 more in, put them down, we get back to work. And it's why these games can still turn out well, on top of, again, all the mental anguish and pain that was levied at the people who no longer work at that studio.
I'm waiting for the first studio to like fire all of their programmers, hire one person, and then they tell that person, now you must use ChatGPT for the work of 10 programmers. And he actually, before that, he was like an HTML programmer or something, right? They just hire like a web developer waiting for that game.
Or just like take someone like off the street. They don't even have to be a programmer. Just like bring the first person you see out in front of the studio. Here, you're now our lead programmer. Use Chat GPT for it.
Yeah, I think it'll come out pretty good.
Mm-hmm.
Might be better than Redfall. I don't know because I haven't played it yet, though. So.
And to Chris's point about like Tencent, yeah, and again, like I'm here neither here nor there about whether Tencent is good, bad, or indifferent to the game industry. But as we've said, when publishers become more involved with a company, it does impact what that studio can do. In some cases, the publisher can just be like, as long as you put out a game, we don't care. Yeah. And then there are some publishers who are like, we expect 30-day progress reports. We want to know exactly what you're doing. And we've seen studios that when there is no publisher involvement, things don't work right. You remember the expose from the Internal Darkness developers who made that horrible X-Men game, and how they were like lying to their publishers. They were like keeping things very secretive, and unfortunately, that can happen as well. And again, it's why game production is really important. Managing people at your studio, because again, like if your creative lead pisses off everyone at your company, there are studios that will protect that creative lead if they made the last 10 out of 10 games. Again, how many exposés have come out about Ubisoft? It seems like every other year there's another filing about a sexual harassment or a toxic environment from a major creative lead at a Ubisoft company.
Have we done like a full creative leads that have got in trouble like podcast yet? Because there's a lot.
Oh
man.
Yes.
Yeah. But yeah, they will. I mean, they will protect. That's the thing. Like, again, just with namesake, you can have someone propagate a toxic environment. And also they might not even be like useful anymore, because like sometimes some people only have so much in them, and then maybe the people they were working with were really important, and that person is gone now, and so they can't really do their job anymore. Those things happen also. And not referring to any specific studio, but you could glean from that, and it's just, again, who you have in your studio matters, right? And it can affect everybody. And again, just like having a bad person or a toxic person at the lead can be detrimental, it can be just as detrimental firing just a few people or whatever, or anything like that. Like, just mistreating your employees in any way, shape, or form is going to lead to a bad product, right? I mean, because this is art, right? Because it is art and science, right? You can get the science done, kind of, sort of, maybe, but the art part will show, right? It'll show the imperfections and the issues and the pain that the developers felt, and the torment that they went through will be there in the improper UI. It will be there in the poor sound. It will be there in the repetitive level design, right? It will show up in various ways, like that, right? And sometimes that's the only way you will kill your story, is just by like playing that bad game. So
yep. And like with Redfall, like from playing it, like from like the very first minutes of it, you can tell that something is not quite right. It lacks, again, the production quality of Arcane in the past. Some of the features don't seem to work right. And one of the major points about this, again, goes back to pricing. If Redfall was priced at like $15 or $24.99, people would probably be like, okay, it's not the best, but again, for the price, we're not really complaining, or we're not going to be complaining as much. As a $70 marquee game on Games Pass and published by Microsoft and all that, it's a different picture. And as we've said, like, the consumers, thanks to YouTubers and streamers and people covering these games, are far more conscious now of issues with these titles, whether they're, important or not. And when a game has all these flaws in it, and they're flaws, again, that it's kind of like sending the game out to be in front of a firing squad at this point. Like,
yeah,
these aren't, like, when we talk about like games like this, we're not talking again about a title that, yes, there's a cult following. Maybe it didn't work well in the AAA space, but it can have its own redeeming elements. These are games that within like 5 minutes of playing, you can start putting together the checklist of flaws and problems with it. The studio knew about them. Like, these are not issues that are hidden or stuff that no one could have foreseen happen. And again, when we have these situations, it's something as a studio that I feel like we've been having a discussion about whether or not there should be a game dev union. And I think
Yeah.
more and more of these cases, I think there
Yeah.
needs to be some. There needs to be a way for a studio to protect its brand. Because again, like
Yes.
Microsoft is not going to get hurt by Redfall. Just like Square Enix or Squaresoft, whatever we're at right now with them, they're not really going to be writing off. Like Forspoken is going to be like a small, like a love tap on their face.
Mm-hmm.
The second Final Fantasy 16 gets revealed, everyone's going to forget about it. The
Yeah.
same as Diablo kind of did with Blizzard right now.
Yeah.
But for the individual people, for the individual companies that get into these situations, these are marks that aren't going to go away. And again, anything that Arcane is going to do next is going to be put right next to Redfall.
Wow. Right after Deathloop, right?
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, it's always what have you done for me lately, and that's the way it's going to be. And could you tell me a little bit more about your gameplay experience with Redfall, since you played it?
Well, it seemed like a game that it was trying to go all over the place. It had a loot system, but the loot system was terrible. You had the different characters, but they felt like, again, like a quarter of what a full character should be. It felt like, again, taking a Dishonored, the guy from Dishonored, and just cutting him into like 4 quarters of a character there.
Oh, yes.
The shooting aspect was admittedly okay, but the enemy AI just was barely functional. It didn't really provide a challenge.
Is it multiplayer focused?
It definitely feels that way. Again,
Yeah.
the whole like live service looter shooter kind of thing, you can definitely see how they unlock, like daily missions at some point. And again, trying to get like you can just like kind of feel what they were trying to do with the looter shooter aspects. I would be willing to bet money that there was probably going to be like a premium currency loot box kind of thing at one point in the game's development. And it just feels like that kind of game. But just like with Marvel's Avengers, like Marvel's Avengers kind of like kept to that pace. I bet Marvel's Avengers probably was one of the reasons why they decided to remove it for Redfall. You can see all those problems. And it's why you can't just slap this stuff on and tell a studio, just make another Fortnite. Just make another Madden game. It doesn't work like that. And ultimately, again, the publisher, especially if you're a publisher who makes, publishes like 10, 20, 30 games a year, one bad game is just like a spot on your ledger. Oh no, this game only sold 100,000 copies. Well, this game sold 6 million copies, so who the heck cares about that one?
Yeah, the just make another game. The just make another anything doesn't, like, in the creative field, doesn't really work, right? Just make another thing, another one because of money will not work, and it never has worked. Like, I don't think we can say it's worked in movies like successfully well, and or in music, right? And or in video games. I think video games have probably had the most success in it, and that's just due to I don't know, games are great, I guess. They offer more replay value, more playtime or something is maybe why, but I think games are the only one that have been able to do that. But like, not even the same studio can make the same thing again and make it successful, right? So just like we were talking about, give me and everybody else a different code base. Well, now this time that we're making the game, even if I have the same people and the exact same team, right? And you're like, make an exact same one. There's so many decisions that need to be made from one, to the sequel, right? It's like, what do we change? What don't we change? What worked? What didn't work? What should we include? How can we make this different? How can we make this better? We have so much pressure we have to live up to. There's so many things. So regardless, you can't even get you cannot even produce this out of the most well-oiled, perfectly run studio. I mean, maybe, oh my gosh, forgive me, I forgot the developers of Hades.
Supergiant.
Maybe Supergiant. other than that, they have to prove me wrong. Other than that, I don't think there's many that can do that, that know, how to pivot in between your games correctly. And I'm talking even between IPs, right? And, pivoting between IPs and pivoting between game genres and things like that. All that takes a lot of balance and a lot of careful consideration and some well-talented people. So.
Yep, and to the point about the video game industry being a business, it's also why you hear stories of how companies bring in a fixer, or they bring in some major name who's going to turn things around and make anything better. Yeah. It doesn't work with the game industry because again, you can't just say go do art. It doesn't work when it comes to game dev. And like we've said, you can tell when a studio knows what they're doing.
Yes.
To your point about Supergiant Games with Hades.
Yes.
Hades is a game that it came out and it worked. It worked phenomenally from the very first, the second they put it out on early access on Epic. People were enjoying that game. It wasn't even out on Steam for at least another year or two, and people were already loving it. And that is not something that you can just bring 10 random people and get that same level of quality. It takes a lot of work. It takes, again, studio culture and skill to get that to happen. And again, it's why a lot of the strengths we've seen from independent developers have come from studios who've been around for 3, 5, 8, 10 years. And it's usually the same group of people. Maybe they've added a few more people along the way. But the people who made it work in the first place, they're still there. They're still loving what they're doing. We brought up New Blood last week. And I mean, New Blood is definitely, they're batting 100 right now. Or batting 1,000 in terms of not just studio culture, but the games they put out. And you can't just force that to work. You can't just, yell at someone and say, go be friends with these people. Or, go do work. And it's going to come out well.
I mean, that you mentioned that, go be friends, because literally one of the biggest feelings that I got from Hades was this development team has been friends since they were kids. They have been making games forever together. The main people, it felt not only what it was good, but there was so much passion and just craft to it, so much excellence of the craft was shown, right? And understanding of the craft and what they were making, right? And it was dude, everybody on this team has been together forever, and it just oozed out, right? Maybe it's just the main 1 or 2 people that have been best friends since they were kids or something, but that definitely something that's shown to me that I felt just how I felt Gollum was made by one person. I felt this was a very cohesive unit that had worked together for eons. It just it oozed through in every aspect.
And it's again why iteration and the growth of a studio is so important. No one starts out and makes Darkest Dungeon. No one starts out and makes Super Mario Odyssey or Tears of the Kingdom or Bastion or Hades. It takes time. It takes understanding the craft of what game dev is. It takes understanding the genre that you want to make. And it's why studios that can put out very wildly different games are some of the top tier studios, Clay Entertainment. They went from 2D hack and slash with Shank. They did Stealth with Mark of the Ninja. Then they went to isometric survival game with Don't Starve, and then you had Hot Lava, Invisible Ink, Oxygen Not Included. And again, for a lot of people from the outside, it's so easy to think, well, if you're talented at making one kind of game, then surely you can make all these games. For every indie developer watching this, let me know how many days it takes you to just go from making a first-person shooter to a real-time strategy to a Dota to a Fortnite to No Man's Sky. Just do all that in 8 days.
Yeah, and then finish up with the racing. And
That's
then
going to
hey,
be the game jam. That's going to be my game jam topic for
there you go.
the game wisdom. Just do 8 different genres in 1 week, and
There you go.
that is your project.
There you go. I really would like to see what people come up with. That should be it.
Mm-hmm.
But definitely, like, that is not. I mean, I think that is one of the key takeaways here. So, like, later when we wrap it up, we'll cover a couple more. But that is definitely a key aspect of it. Is that changing genres are rapidly. Because what the previous, well, they were messing with shooters, right? So it was Deathloop. So I guess in this respect, it was definitely some mismanagement, right? And it was definitely the vision probably wasn't there. And from what the issues that I saw that were extremely technical, right? I saw a lot of like IK animation issues. I saw a lot of button prompt issues, like very low level, like things that I mean, they're going to be picked up, right? Low hanging fruit that will easily be assaulted on by any YouTuber for days on days. And I saw a lot of that there, just like in Gollum, right? Like I only played, I don't know how long I played it. I played it as long as I could, Gollum, and there was just so many bugs and glaring issues. And again, I was just dumbfounded by that. I'm sure you felt the same thing as you were playing Redfall, correct?
Mm-hmm. Yep, and again, it's why from the outside, it's so easy to think that studios can just switch development or switch genres. But if a studio is known for one thing, it's and I think this could also be kind of like that issue of comparing indie to AAA. And I think it's kind of like the reverse. Usually when we talk about this, it's, people will talk about indie developers, like, why can't you make an Overwatch? Or why can't you make Diablo? But now it's these days like, well, if this 5-person team can make 3 different games, why can't your 80-person team with, quadruple the budget and all of our resources, why can't we just tell you a game and you make it in like
Right.
2 to 3 years?
Right. Yeah, they want to chat GPT like the dev teams, man.
Yeah. Kind of like, again, like ordering a pizza, like from chat.
Yeah.
You just like go to the studio and say, yeah, I want you to make a first-person shooter with gothic themes, and then next time, okay, now I want you to make an RPG with completely cel-shaded aesthetics, all comic book style. Just do that.
Yeah, and then a 2-year-long gotcha campaign.
I mean, if you look like as like an example of a game that launched really well this year, you can look at something like Hi-Fi Rush and like Tango Gameworks. Like their last game was a very dark horror shooter, that Ghostwire Tokyo game. They did The Evil Within, games that we don't describe as being happy and jumpy and all exciting. But the reason why they were able to pivot like that, one, they had a different lead on the project, someone who really wanted to make that game, who knew what he wanted that game to turn out, and you had a studio people who were all gung ho to do that. And again, like, you can look at, and people were again comparing like Forspoken to Hi-Fi Rush when they were both released. Like, even though they are both from like AAA or prestige studios or prestige publishers, that does not mean those developments were anywhere near the same.
Exactly. Yeah, I'm starting to wonder, how much like publishers and like and the studios, like like there's a separation. You're like, okay, this is published by a large studio, but did they even pay attention? Did they just give the studio money and just like whatever and don't care because it's going to be nothing to them? Because that, what I mean, is that a possibility too, right? It's just, it seems like on so many, I'm not sure where they were going with Redfall, where the market was for it, honestly. Like, that would probably be like the last type of game I'd be trying to make at this point. Right now, I think there's some other ventures. I could be wrong, but I think right now is probably not the best time, right? And there's other games that are doing it much better. And so, you know, the only thing to me that makes sense is that maybe they were forced to release it early, and then of course, or maybe they were just forced to let it go, and then of course it had such a terrible dev process, right? And again, that leads to the importance of having a team, and then understanding that you cannot grind capitalism on game development in the same fashion. So.
Yep. And to that point about just, publisher involvement, there's again, like, that is definitely something to, like, bring Seth in, who does a lot of, like, work with publishers and stuff like that on. Yeah, there's some publishers out there who are just like, we're going to take 34% of your money, and that's it. Like, we don't really do anything else besides it. Yep. We've seen store pages where it just feels like very little was done.
Yep.
That, again, the game was just kind of like thrown out the window and told, okay, fly.
Yeah, fly.
And then there's some publishers who will do, like, they will get involved with that game. They will try and do all the marketing. They will build a really great store page, and they'll, reach out to influencers. They'll do all that. Now, whether they still take the same, they take 50%, 30%, I don't know. But again, no two publishers are the same.
Yep.
And again, when you combine that with how nebulous game dev is, it leads to these just wildly different games. Like we said earlier, like, Nintendo is Nintendo. If any publisher tries to just be like Nintendo, they are going to fail. Because no one has that same level. You can't just, again, clone Shigeru Miyamoto. Or whoever
Sega?
Yeah.
Sega.
You can't clone, like, I don't know who's the head on the Zelda game. You can't just put them... You can't just, like, ask someone to be like that. And it's why people who are part of the success, whether they are the creative leads or just, really great programmers and concept artists, they deserve praise, and they are as important to this process.
Yeah. Go ahead. Sorry.
I was going to say, and why, like, if you expect that, if you just fire, 99% of the studio, if you just keep that one creative lead on, and then tell them to make another game, you're not going to have that same magic happen.
No, exactly. And so, like, if I want to put this in another analogy, like we can take it, think musically, right? Okay, so let's say I have, I don't know, any band, name a band, I have a guitarist, a bass player, a drummer, that's in a singer, right? And the band is known for the singer, the type of way he sings, his voice. They're used to the type of guitar. Like, maybe we could switch out the guitar, right? We could switch out the guitar with another guitarist that is just as proficient, right? And that might be akin to switching out someone in the production team, right?
Mm-hmm.
But let's say we switched out the singer, which would be more akin to the lead director in a video game, right? Or the main passion, the heart and soul of whatever the studio, because the studio has to have one. There has to be someone who believes in the game more than anyone else, and that person has to exist. If they don't exist anymore, right, it's not going to go very far. So again, back to the analogy, if you were to replace that singer with someone else, immediately it's a different thing, right? And it's not, and you can't just say, oh, sound like that other guy, because it won't work, right? And it's going to be completely different. And so it is the same. Like, I mean, I don't know if you has like Metal Gear, I forgot. Oh my gosh. If you try to, I think they did replace him and release another Metal Gear. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I don't know what the reception was on that. Was it good? Did it come out good?
Nope.
No? Okay. Well, then, case closed. I mean, it's very important, the heart and soul of an operation. And it's kind of hard, again, because game dev is nebulous, to know where that is in the team, right? Of course, the director is going to be very important. And, so, like, just replacing them willy-nilly, like, 3 times in a project, and that's like that. I mean, that's like playing a game of telephone with like not even a game. I mean, it's like because game design documents are, they're nebulous. Also, it depends how a studio uses them. But it's like if you have 3 different devs, he's gonna be like, okay, so this was the mission. He's gonna have a different idea of the mission, and through his capabilities and understanding, what he'll be able to produce. And then the same thing for the third one. And so by then, the vision's going to be so watered down. The coders are going to be so not knowing what to do. Like you said, they pulled out microtransactions were kind of there, or it seemed like there was going to be some type of different level to sub or banners or etc. And again, when you're doing that, you're literally are making a different game. So then there is no switch to pull and change it and pull that code out. And then expect for that game to function. So like the original, if there was even original vision, is not going to be there, right? That was Anthem anyway that you were talking about. Sorry, but I mean that's just another example of it. Yep. So,
and to Chris's comment about there's going to be a survival game about Lord of the Rings or something coming out, it's why we say you can't chase trends, because by the time you get that game out, the trend is over. Again. The whole looter shooter live service thing was like huge in 2018, 2019. Not so much today. The same goes again. How many studios rushed to make a Fortnite clone in like 2020 to 2021? How many announcements were there about, hey, this is the latest Fortnite battle arena style battle royale? That the term battle royale was like seared in my brain in 2020, 2021 there.
Right.
And how many of those games A came out, B are still being played, or C came anywhere close to being a Fortnite level success? And it's
Zero.
And again, like publishers and investors are still trying to chase that dream that, oh, we can just put out an amazing game every year. Or, and again, like one with Call of Duty, and when they were doing like every year releases.
Is that why we didn't even bring up Call of Duty in the whole shooter series?
Yeah.
I was wondering why.
And like we've said, like game development, I guess let me see, what's our time? I think we're about an hour before. I think we can probably wrap things up in the next few minutes, if that's good for you.
Yeah, I feel like we were hitting 2 hours, aren't we?
We're almost there. We're about 20 minutes. But
okay, easy. Don't we have another game?
Yeah. Let's see. We brought up Forspoken. I did not play Forspoken at all. Did you?
No, I did not. I mean, again, like I would have played Redfall. If today, today, just for research. But it was $69, right? That's another thing is like, please acknowledge the value of your product, right? Like if you know, you should know. There is no way that game with all those bugs, there's not a single QA. Did they have no QA? Did they have no testers that said, hey man, like the animation's really horrible and I can't pick things up? Like did they again, like how does that happen? And so if you have to release it, be aware of the quality of your game, and price it accordingly, right? And I mean, like, I think more people would have gave Gollum a chance if it was like, I don't know, price it like
15, 20.
15. Yeah, let's start at $17.99.
Yeah.
Let's be cool, and then go ahead.
And again, like it's why the independent space has really been able to bump up the pricing of their games over the past 3 years. Again, you remember, I'm sure everyone watching this, remember when games were being priced at like $4.99 for a game that was in development for like 5 years?
Yes. Oh my gosh. That makes my heart, like, I was like, come on, bro, don't do that. No.
Today, we're seeing indie games being released comfortably at like $17, $20. Now probably like a new minimum of $24.
Right.
We're seeing so many games being released at $30, $35, $40. And these studios can do that if they have the quality to back it up.
Yeah, and they usually do. I mean, most of the time they do. And that I think that's a good thing, because as we were talking about the apology and also a side tangent of like the race to the bottom, I really would like indie devs to price their game accordingly, up and down, right? Like, yeah, if you've worked 5 years on the game and it's worth the quality, then ratchet up that price bracket. If sell it for what you think it's worth, right? For what you know it's worth. And as a game developer, I know you've played other games and you've bought other games, so you should have at least some idea of what a game like that might go for. You did your market research, right? So you should be aware what other games are similar in that vein should be. So it's like these games, I don't like, they're being forced to, because it's AAA, it's forced to be $69. It's forced to be $79, and I'm supposed to there's no way. I don't know how 7-year-old me would have been if I begged for Gollum for my birthday and I got Gollum. I think that my friends would have known a little bit faster than the 3 months we were talking about. But it's one of those things that, like, there's no reason that they should come out in this fashion. And if they do, please price it accordingly, make some adjustments, and if not, cancel it. There's no shame in putting it up and being like, shutting down the factory and being like, okay, we clearly did not make what we aimed to make, and we should cancel the game, not only for the future of our studio, right? So later on, we won't be known for, when I look up Daedalic, I'm going to be like, oh, they made the Gollum game. Yeah, nah, I'm cool. But if I looked them up and I saw they made Deathloop, right, then we're talking. That's probably how they got it. So anyway, I think I lost my train of thought there, but we're getting close on time regardless.
Yeah. And again, like, it's that issue where you can't force a game to be successful, just as you can't force a developer to do something that they're not comfortable or they're not skilled in. And why we've seen some of these games that just come out and it doesn't look right. It doesn't feel right to play them.
Yeah.
And when that happens, it's the developer who's left holding the bag. And why you need to be very mindful, again, of what is the success of a studio. Because I think, going back to this point about, like, the machine, that a lot of publishers view game development strictly as a product. That something can be commoditized, it can be mass-produced easily. You made Call of Duty last year, why can't you just make the next Call of Duty at half the price and half the time?
Just a side tangent. Like, one of the things that really irks me is that a lot of the software, like actual software, like, I don't know, OS, Windows, a lot of the development ideas and pipelines have been pushed down onto game development. And you can't develop games the same way you make a bank program, right? It is not the same thing. They are completely different opposites. So trying to impose the same type of deadlines as, like, a bank software on a shooter or an RPG or a driving game just doesn't work. Trying to impose the same type of development techniques on game development just don't work. Again, it's very nebulous as in its own thing. So also those practices, I think, need to be refined. So,
and again, you cannot just force a game to work. And if you're telling a studio, just do this, and they're not able to do it, you can't just say, do it all in 2 years or do it all in 6 months. And again, game design, we have not even spoken about just the challenge of building these games. That's another hour and a half easily.
Yeah.
But you can't just say, oh, we'll figure out the exact movement tech of this platformer in 2 months. And then from there, we'll build all the gunplay out in another 3 months. And then we'll have every level completely sketched out and put into our game in, A month. You
Right.
know, it's that easy to build. You know, Elden Ring. You can
Right.
build an Elden Ring area in like a month, right?
Right. I mean, I love that point, Josh, and that's exactly what I'm saying is that you literally see these game develop, they have it and they have the Trello set up the exact same way. They're using the exact same pipelines as they did. I know a lot of people who have come from software engineering and
Mm-hmm.
they come over to the rude awakening of game development because it is not the same, right? And so again, there's no way like there's someone's lying to you if they're like, oh yeah, bro, we can get this done in this amount of time, and then after that this will be done, and then after
Mm-hmm.
this, they know you should know either A, they are inexperienced, or B, they're over promising, or C, they're lying, right?
Yep.
Like, go ahead.
Again, if someone comes in and says, I can get this all done in like a month, you know, these lazy developers, you know, I can make a first person shooter in like half the time,
Yeah.
they probably have no idea what they're doing. Again, it's why, you know, there's another topic about, you know, how much you listen to hardcore fans and, you know, how much do YouTubers and streamers really know about game dev.
Right.
And again, you can't just flip a switch or pull a lever and have a 10 out of 10 game. And a lot of publishers and a lot of people see it like that. That, hey, you know, if this studio made this game, surely they can make a 10 out of 10 in this genre. Or that every game they're going to make is this 10 out of 10 super fantastic thing. And again, people want that story. They want to see, you know, that Pixar has made every Pixar movie is a fantastic one. I think even people are getting tired of the Pixar formula these days.
Yes, they are. Yeah.
And it's oftentimes why some of the companies that do survive, they kind of go into that hermit mode. They're like, okay, we're going to work on this project but, you know, when it's about ready, then we'll make that announcement. Again, Nintendo these days, like, how long did it take them from announcement to actually release Tears of the Kingdom? I think, didn't they, like, announce the game, like, 2-3 months ago? Like, they actually revealed it, like, 2 to 3 months ago.
They revealed it 2 to 3, yeah. They just revealed it. And then, so we have no idea, right? How long it was in production.
Yep, and again, like, I know there have been stories, and Nintendo has fully canceled projects that didn't meet their standards.
Oh, yeah.
Again, imagine if Nintendo was like another publisher, you know, how many different Mario games could we have gotten? We probably could have gotten that Mario Battle Royale game with the cosmetic skins and Battle Pass.
Jeez, I couldn't imagine if Nintendo was a publisher and the amount of like control they would want and like quality out of you. They would have no room for games like we're just sort of talking about today at all. They would.
And again, it's why, like, Nintendo is a studio that gets company culture. They get this idea that we need to treat our employees right. Because if someone's afraid of losing their job, or that, you know, the lead is going to be fired any day now, or the lead is just causing trouble at your studio, why would they work on that? And I know there are a lot of indie developers who came from AAA who basically went into that space, had a horrible experience, and then took all that knowledge and said, you know what? I'm going to make the game I want, and all this I don't want to deal with. We're never doing that again.
Honestly, yeah, but not to go into a long tangent. It's probably another show, but like literally anyone I know that has worked in AAA does not want to go back. So,
I looked up Tears of the Kingdom. So it was officially announced as a sequel in 2019. They showed one trailer in 2021, and then they did the first opening release, or they actually announced a release date in 2022 before it was then pushed back to 2023. And I know, like, Firaxis does something similar. Like, when they announce their game, it's usually like a 6 to 8, maybe 4 to 6 month window before that game comes out. Because they know that it's better to put a project out to pasture than to announce it, you know, week 1, get everyone excited, and then 2 years later say, oh, we give up, we can't make it work. And
go ahead.
It's a very interesting analog to the number of Kickstarted and early access projects that failed over the past decade. Of teams going, you know what, just give us $700,000 and we'll make, we'll make our own No Man's Sky meets Diablo meets Telltale. And then it's like 3 years later, I don't know what we're doing. We ran out of money like a year ago. We haven't told anyone yet.
Yeah, there's definitely like a sweet spot for like development time. You don't want to go too long and you don't want it to be too short, and so there's a sweet spot. If dev goes on too long, you have the possibility of losing people, or if you're more solo, just waste spending money or not making money with that game out. And so that's definitely something, that's what happens in that regard for sure.
And it's why if I ever do have a chance to talk to someone from Nintendo, probably like the one question I want to ask them is, how early into a project do they decide to go all in on?
Yeah.
Because again, like the stuff that we talk about with Nintendo, like their games feel like a cut above everyone else. We may only hear about it like a year before the game comes out, 6 months. But who knows how long that idea in some way, shape, or form was being tested and prototyped at, some computer at Nintendo before they say, you know what, it's good, move it into actual production. Or, no, this is just not working. Put it, like, I think everyone would love to see, like, Nintendo's, like, failed column. All the games like that didn't work for them, like that developers would probably kill each other to get those ideas.
Oh yeah, definitely. That would be like the if they were on carts, that'd be the most expensive classic games ever. Like that would be insane. But yeah, like if somehow like, because like the way that Nintendo does it is quite amazing, and they're just really good at like navigating like any situation, from like shortages of like, they can turn a shortage in like of chips into like a blue ocean effect for them, and actually like they can turn anything into a good thing for them. And again, like you say, they're just a cut above. It's unreal the quality and feel when you play a Nintendo game, right? And again, like it's because how long has Shigeru been there? Like this whole time. And I am sure like he at least takes a look at every game and looks at it and says, yeah, at least something, right?
And again, it's why everyone really mourned the loss of Iwata when he passed away last decade. Because, like, Nintendo is one of those studios, much like Supergiant and much like Clay Entertainment and so on, that the people become part of what makes that studio work. And if you lose those people, you lose, that kind of irreplaceable factor. Again, we brought that point about if you have two people who work well together for like years and then they break up, and then you ask like another, you bring on like 2 or 3 random other people to work on a project, it's not going to have that same connection. And it's why a lot of developers like to work on small teams when everyone knows everyone and exactly, you can trust, your concept artist person to put out amazing work, and you don't have to, be constantly bugging them. And, when it's that well-oiled machine, people, like, you can't fake that. You can't reproduce that kind of thing just by throwing a ton of money and resources at a project.
Yeah, well said. And like Chris said, Iwata even took a pay cut when the Wii U flopped. I mean, CEOs here would like fire everybody and increase their pay. So that's just a clear difference, right?
How many people are jumping to the event? Bobby Kotick or whatever his name is from Activision Blizzard. How many people watching this run are like hardcore Activision Bobby fans? You have like a tattoo of them
in the chat. Yeah, show us your tattoo. Let us know in chat. No? Oh, okay.
Yep. See record-breaking bonuses. Yep. And again, people, and I guess this will be my final point. Then I think that's going to be it for me. People tend to view video games as, again, being either all art, that it's this thing that can never be criticized or complained about. It's just your problem if a game doesn't work. or they view it as all business. It's a product. It's something that, we can data mine it out and make the perfect first person shooter that you can use a chat program or a chat GPI, whatever it's called, chat GPT or AI driven to make the perfect first person shooter, and you can just fire your entire design team, and a program could make Doom Eternal or Tears of the Kingdom. But it's not. A video game exists as a combination of both, and it's why the studios and developers who succeed the best at this industry, they get both sides. They understand that a video game can be this amazing experience, but they also understand that there is a process to it. That it's not just you closing your eyes and dream wishing that, the axe physics in God of War work, or that building stuff in Tears of the Kingdom is cool. It takes a process. And that is a process that it's not something you can just, put in a computer and the computer automatically does it. It takes iteration, it takes skill and knowledge. And it's why we see sometimes amazing things from like first and second time developers who have been studying this stuff for years. And why they get one or both of these aspects. But it takes both if you want to succeed. And again, as my final point, when I say succeed, I mean releasing commercially viable games that you can live off of. Again, there is a difference between putting out a game as a side project for your friends and family, and putting out a game that you intend to pay your mortgage with, or, keep your lights on at the end of the month.
Exactly. And okay, so I will try and make this my final point. Just as you said, Josh. Okay, so game dev itself is something very different than any other form of media. I guess we can umbrella it under media, right? Or a product maybe to be consumed, right? But the way that it differs is in that first, you cannot take I previously stated, you cannot take the Ford manufacturing process or the software engineering process and force that upon game dev, because game dev is far too nebulous to quantify certain things. You cannot say, just like we've stated a couple times, we're going to make this great feeling character in 2 months. The third month, we're going to make some great looking UI, and the fourth month, the soundtrack. And you cannot, nothing can be guaranteed because the way game dev is very iterative, and so every change you make needs to be changed and checked. And sometimes, like you said, you know what, you need to go ahead and just can it, or maybe completely change it. So those things happen. So trying to develop game software in the same fashion as like regular bank software or like a website doesn't work. There are some key aspects that you can use, maybe some tools like source control and things like that. Those are good to use, but you can't do that. So the second final point is that right now we're witnessing the grind of capitalism. We're seeing those types of models of production upon studios, right? Studios that are not meant to function that way. And like studios, like specifically, like most game developers are you would probably call them slightly motley crew, slightly different, right? They're not exactly fit in the box like bankers or something like that. They're a little bit different because they're creatives, right? And so they're different type of people, and thus need to be treated as such, because this is a different type of art medium than, for say, bank software. If, just for example, if we were making bank software, I would know exactly what they wanted it to look like, what logo they wanted to use, what functions needed to work, what it needs to do, and everything is said up front. So all I have to do is literally throw it to my 10 programmers and say, I need it to do this. It's going to look like this. End of story.
Yep.
In game development, I have a vision, right? If I am the director, I have a vision, and I say, I want it to look like this. I want it to play like this. I want it to sound like this. I want it to feel, smell, taste like this. It needs to evoke these feelings from the players, right? So all those things need to be conveyed. No bankers like, I want you to like evoke feelings out of our customers of like, like they're not saying those things. And so that's another reason why like you cannot grind like factorially, like cutting employees and removing people and expecting the same product to come out, or replacing them like Lego blocks, because that doesn't work. And then my final point again is, I might be the same point, is that be careful with who you publish with. Especially, I know a few of you here are looking at publishers. If you're watching this video later, be careful. Please read everything. Hopefully we'll have a roundtable with Seth, because Seth works with a lot of publishers, maybe when we discuss that. And so just be aware of what you're working with. Make sure if you have control of your IP, how much of the funding, are they going to work with you later? Are they just going to give you money and release your game to the sharks? And it's really just going to say that you release the game, right? Like be careful what you do. And also we did cover about how important people are in the studio. Like you could not replace, like the day that Shigeru passes will be a very, very sad day. I mean, the day that Iwata died was very sad for me, because I was like my word, like what's going to happen to Nintendo because of the way the culture is. Now, I know people aren't really going to cry if someone from Bethesda at this, maybe except for what's his name, Todd, maybe except for
Todd Howard.
Maybe except for Todd Howard. I don't think that if anybody else, passes in Bethesda, that it will really be like a sad event like that. And that says something about their culture there, like we were talking about. So, I think that sums up my final points there.
Yep. And as a final design point, again, like, you can't just say to someone, make a first-person shooter like Doom. Make a platformer like Mario. Just make any platformer. Everything feels different. And you can't just, again, flip a switch and take a well-known, studio that makes all first-person shooters, tell them to make a good platformer. Now, if you bring on like a creative lead who can actually, articulate this, if you're like an id Software and you say, yeah, exactly, Vincent. Like if id Software says one day, you know what, we want to make an RPG. We'll make a, Doom engine, whatever the engine they use, RPG. And they go and they hire, 5 people who made some of the most amazing RPGs, creative leads who can direct a team and do all that, they could possibly get it done. But it's going to be arguably harder for them to do that compared to a team of like 10 people who have been making RPGs their entire life, and they're going to make another one. And again, it's why studio culture matters. It's why skill sets matter. It's why, again, you cannot just say, well, all programmers are alike. So, let's just fire 30 programmers we have. Let's hire, 15 people right out of college who have a programming degree. They can do the same work, and we'll pay them, 75% less, and we'll get the same quality.
That's right. Let me see here. I do have one small, minor, final point here, and this cannot go understated. Is that depending wherever you are in your game development career, and maybe you were thinking of switching engines for whatever reason, please be aware of what happens when you change engines. Like, I know a lot, like I've seen so many videos that your engine choice doesn't matter. Your engine choices, I literally need to be the only one that's going to make, yeah, your engine choice does matter, bro. That's what's going to be the title. It'll be real clickbaity. But like, it does matter. And we're seeing this from large studios, right? Largely funded studios that could not navigate the gap of an engine change, right? And what that says is that basically, the knowledge base required just at understanding the engine level is very important, right? And it's so like, if you, let's say you have this one, the only person that understands Unreal, because your team is so small, and you got rid of him, and you hire somebody else, and you're working on an Unreal Engine game. There's no C++ because Unreal is C++ based, but he doesn't know Unreal. Then you're screwed. I mean, you have no way to move forward. And so like, misunderstanding the, because how many multifaceted disciplines are needed in game development, like that needs to be taken into account. So when you say fire 10 programmers, we're not really firing 10 programmers. We're firing one programmer who is versed maybe in blueprints and Unreal, one programmer who's versed in network programming, one programmer who's well versed in combat, maybe two. We have two combat guys. What happens if we lose all of those, right? Or if we lose some and we are only left with the combat guys, and now the combat guys are the lead guys, and they have to tell them how to make the UI, and they don't know because they're just combat guys. So that's why people are so important, right? And keeping your team together is so very important. Okay, so was that my last point? Heart and soul of the company is very important, cannot be understated. And when we discuss games, I think that should be more of a salient point. While game development is nebulous, I think understanding who is behind the game and who's making it is something that we should know. And I think that's one thing that people do enjoy about indie games, is that they're usually at that level where they know who's making the game, and they can see them and they can talk to them, right? And it's like, I think it's important to know the studio that makes your game and about them, right? And if they change like a football team, how can you follow them?
Yep. And if they change and they do something completely different, and you trust that studio for their title after that, or the title after that, and so on and so forth.
Exactly. And even if let's say they changed and they came out with a bad one, but then they came out with the good one and fixed it, you still can't trust that third one.
Yep. It's why, again, that I do think, like, if we ever do get a game debut, and after this, I'm just going to have to stop. We'll just turn off our mics or just keep going. That if we ever do get a game dev union, there has to be some kind of stipulation for canceling a project. That a developer has the right to do that to protect their brand equity.
Exactly.
Again, like, we don't talk about Nintendo having horrible releases, because has Nintendo actually ever released a legitimately horrible game?
No.
Again, like, people can argue about, like, Pokemon, like the latest Pokemon game having, like, bugs and issues, but that was patched out. But can, like, anyone think of the last time a Nintendo developed game got, like, a 2 out of 10 from IGN?
Yeah, never. I mean, every single one, like, just oozes. Like how I was talking about Disco Elysium. Was it Disco Elysium oozing? One game was oozing that I was talking about earlier, and every Nintendo game oozes quality and oozes competency and understanding in every single aspect of like games and what they're meant to be, or what each game that they make is supposed to be, right? Like you're not playing like any of their games wondering, I wonder if they knew which way they were going right here at this part. Every single part is planned out and is perfect, and it doesn't work, and it works perfectly, right? And like if there is issues, bugs can happen and they can be patched out. Like they will patch those out. They ain't gonna let those bugs live. Nintendo's fast. They're lawyers, man. They'll have the lawyers fix their bugs.
There you go. And to a Big O's comment, I think what you need to do is when you release Samurai Pig, it should be Joshua Reyes Presents Samurai Pig. I think that'll be the perfect name right there. All right, but we do have to get going. This is not the 10,000 celebration where we'll go extra long. I think we both have dinner waiting for us, and I have probably a Windows reset to do later, which I am so excited about. That's something I love doing, just resetting all my settings.
Samurai Pig, the final point. Oh man, good. Thank you, Vince.
Alright, so everyone, if you've been watching this live or recorded, thank you so much for tuning in. If you're new, do all the YouTubing stuff, liking, subscribing. Be sure to visit the Discord and Patreon as well.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, thank everybody for stopping by, chatting. Appreciate everyone's support. Be sure to join the Discord. All the links are down below. Be sure and wishlist buy Josh's books. Join the Discord, and always leave some comments down below about things you might want us to talk about, or talk about them in the Discord. That would be much appreciated. And again, thank you so much for stopping by, everyone. We appreciate it.
And be sure to check out Josh's games. They are listed down below in the description as well.
That's right.
Other than that, we will be back next Saturday around our usual time of 5 p.m. ET. Like Joshua just said, if you have a suggestion for topics, let us know. Otherwise, we will wrap things up for tonight. And for everyone watching, be sure to come back for the discussions on game design here and on game wisdom, where some of the art and science of games. Have a great rest of your weekend, and see you next time.